Deadly storms.
The deadliest mass
A warehouse.
Deadly ambush.
Deadly.
As you probably can tell, that's the sound of me reading a book in my underwear while swinging in a hammock deep in the Amazon forest. I was there for an ayahuasca spirit journey, attempting to kill my ego. And of course, I recorded it all. So stay tuned for my psychedelic experience in the next episode of the season finale, Death of Ego. But back to this episode. The reason you're listening to me read while swinging in a hammock is because it's also the sound of my complete internet detachment. For 2 weeks, I lived without hot water, mirrors, electricity, phone, laptop, and most importantly, connection to the outside world. I was completely oblivious to what was happening outside the rainforest canopy. And once I got over the impulsive email checking withdrawals, my God, was it sweet. But, as Grandpa always says, you can't make a living doing psychedelics in your underwear. And so, back to reality I went, and reconnected.
The Civil War in Syria. Deadly ambush.
And just like that, I was back in the media fuzz. This time around, however, I could see through the fuzz a bit more clearly and was surprised by how much of it, particularly the news, was of violence and death.
Violence has been a focus of media as such as it existed really from our earliest written records.
That's Dr. Sherry Hamby.
I am a clinical psychologist by training, and I am the editor of the American Psychological Association journal, Psychology of Violence, and the director of the Life Paths Appalachian Research Center, and a research professor of psychology at the University of the South.
Sherry's right. Death and depictions of death have been at the core of entertainment media, from the primitive cave drawings to Greek tragedies to bullfighting, video games, and films. And as much as we'd like to forget, even up into the 19th century, the torture and execution of prisoners was a popular public affair. So no, modern society has not gained a new appetite for death in their media and entertainment. We've always been this way.
I don't think there's any question either that the pervasiveness of aggressive material and violent material has really changed dramatically.
From the moment we wake up, a flood of content washes over us. The amount of content produced and distributed on a daily basis is mind-blowing. Upwards of 2.5 exabytes. That's 2.5 billion gigs, all of which is competing for our attention. It's so much data that for this episode, I focus on one type of media, the news. In this episode, I talk with a journalist couple, a psychologist, a professor of media studies, and a poet to answer, are humans becoming more violent? Why are we increasingly seeing more images of death? What effect does seeing death in the news have on our behavior? And is it my responsibility as a global citizen to bear witness to images of death across the world, even if it's at the expense of my own happiness? That's right, it's about to get deep in here. Please join me for episode 12 of the Adventures of Memento Mori, Deadly News.
From the Maida Creative Company, this is the Adventures of Memento Mori, a seeker's guide for learning to live by remembering to die. The podcast that explores mortality. Here's your host, D.S. Moss.
News headlines have always been sensationalist. If it bleeds, it leads. But now it seems like it's getting worse. Plane crashes, terrorist attacks, Zika, school shootings, police shootings. Every day, there's a new threat. More and more people are dying. So my first question is so much death in the news a sign that human beings are becoming more violent? Well, it didn't take long to find the statistics to answer that question. But before I share it, what would you guess?
True or false? We are living in the most violent decade in recorded history.
False.
I'd say false.
I hate these kind of things. False.
Unfortunately true.
I would say false.
The answer is False. Not only do we not live in the most violent decade, by almost every objective measure, we live in the safest, healthiest, and most peaceful era in human existence. I've listed the sources and annotations on the episode homepage. Yep, historically, humanity has been considerably more volatile and violent. The world is still dangerous, of course, and by no means should we be popping corks for a job well done. But because of the 24-hour news cycle, unlimited distribution channels, journalistic hyperbole, a tenfold increase in professional photographers and filmmakers, and a world population armed with camera phones, we're constantly witnessing the graphic images of the worst that humanity has to offer.
We are inundated with images of death. I mean, everywhere. At least in the non-mainstream media world, in the social media world, we are. The mainstream media does not want to show images of dead bodies. But, your Twitter feed, the other day a beheading video just popped up in my Twitter feed.
I invited photojournalist and documentarian duo Micah Guerin and Marie-Helene Carlton to talk about their experience as reporters of the news.
Before everything went through this narrow funnel of the mainstream media where editors would be, in a way, the collective conscious and make decisions based on, we are publishing this because it serves a greater journalistic purpose. Now, with this plethora of images, the onus is on the viewer to try to understand what the image means and what the context is, what the intention in putting out the image was. So
Marie-Helene goes on to say that not only are we seeing a lot more images of death, they're becoming harder to understand because they're coming from a variety of sources, each trying to influence us to feel a particular way about them.
There's governments, there's militant groups, terrorist organizations, individuals, activist groups, citizen journalists. We have to ask ourselves, what am I to make of this image?
And that's the challenge, right? So not only are they competing for my attention, now they're also competing for my interpretation. A recent example of this is the assassination of the Russian ambassador to Turkey, Andrei Karlov. I was mesmerized by the photos of his corpse lying there on the ground with his killer standing above it, in a well-fitted suit, in an art gallery. And the corpse was lying there so perfectly dead. I was mesmerized by the scene, but I didn't know what to feel. I wasn't sad. I wasn't glad. I didn't instinctively know who should be the good guy and who should be the bad guy. So let's talk about that. The corpse as a vessel for messages in the media.
So corpse is a non-hierarchical assemblage of heterogeneous elements, of many, many elements.
Welcome Margaret Schwartz, Associate Professor at Fordham University in the Department of Communication Media Studies.
It is both is and is not the person that it refers to. So it's a referential object, it's a media object, it points to, it comes between the memory of the person and the person in life, right? It's made up of many elements that are both material and representational, shall we say, or textual. And it's an in-between, a mediation sort of object, and it's a liminal object. It sort of stands on the edge of things. Because a corpse doesn't refer back to the person that it was for very long.
And you thought a corpse was just a dead body.
What I teach is media theory and feminist media theory and media and embodiment. But my research interest is specifically on the connection between sort of objects in the world, specifically bodies, and then the media that represent them.
Dead bodies.
Dead bodies. And also living bodies. If you want to go deep into my catalog, I have a piece on Britney Spears' vagina. So I'm interested in how random body parts interact with the media. It was not a pun. That happened.
Margaret is the author of Dead Matter, The Meaning of Iconic Corpses. And as she just explained, the corpse is more than a dead body. It's a representational storytelling object.
So it's a really excellent example of how the physical can come to be metaphorical.
And so you break it down in your book about, in regards to media, three types of corpses: the nation, tabloid, and the martyr. Mm-hmm. Can you just go over just a quick summation of those three?
Yeah. So each of those are kind of like corporal metaphors in a way, right? Like the nation is often figured as a body. Right, the king is the head, and the people are the body. So you have corpses that come to stand in for a nation or a group of people. So those are our nation bodies and the ones that I talk about.
Examples she talks about in her book are Lenin and Eva Peron. In each case, these dead leaders and their corpses come to represent something their nation is about.
Next is the martyred body. They're bodies that stand in for groups of people that consider themselves dispossessed or who are oppressed in some way, and the death of that person becomes symbolic of the suffering of the entire group of people.
Not only does a martyr become a symbol of a cause, they also become a rallying point for others. In the book, she talks about Emmett Till, the 14-year-old boy who was lynched in Mississippi in 1955 for flirting with a white girl, and who, through the image of his mutilated corpse, became a symbol of the civil rights movement.
And the third is tabloid bodies, which I had to fight with my publisher a lot to get that in there, because what's interesting about tabloid bodies is that if the martyred body is someone who becomes famous only in death, right? The tabloid body is a body that we have obsessively known all throughout life and which dies sort of unexpectedly, right? And again, the two figures that are emblematic of this that I cover in the book are Diana of Wales and Michael Jackson.
Those are the three types of corpses Margaret talks about in her book: the nation, the martyr, and the tabloid. All of them metaphors for embodiment in the media in various ways. But it's the martyred body that we see most frequently in the news. And when we return, we're going to be talking about the recently martyred Hamza Ali al-Khatib, Aylan Kurdi, and Laquan McDonald.
Hello, fellow provocateurs who believe death is a topic worth talking about. We need your help spreading the word. Be the slightly odd yet endlessly fascinating conversationalist at your next party, and tell your friends about the Adventures of Memento Mori. Want to stay in the loop? Join our inner circle by going to our site, theadventuresofmementomori.com, and be sure to stay up to date with the quest for enlightenment on YouTube by following our channel, The Adventures of Memento Mori podcast. And now, back to the show.
Okay, a recap. So far, I've found the answers to: are humans becoming more violent? And why are we seeing more images of death in news-type media? No, we are not becoming more violent. In fact, we live in the most peaceful era in human history. And we are seeing more death because our new ability to record and distribute images makes it possible to witness the death that has always existed. Now there are just fewer places for it to hide. We left the conversation with how corpses are used in media as symbols to deliver a bigger message.
When they did return his body, they said, well, we're going to give him back to you, but you have to promise, you have to sign a paper that says you're not going to publicize this in any way.
Back with media professor Dr. Margaret Schwartz talking about the martyred body of Hamza Ali al-Khatib, a 13-year-old Syrian boy who was tortured, castrated, and murdered for protesting the Syrian regime.
Well, they allowed an activist to videotape the body and to show that it was obvious that the body had been tortured. So he becomes then a figure for the Syrian resistance or for the oppressed Syrian people.
And back with documentarians Marie-Helene Carlton and Micah Guerin.
And in this case, he becomes an icon, but in both ways. The regime hopes that bodies that have died in this way, torture, will deter people from going into the streets to protest, but yet for many, many others, it acts as a catalyst for protest, and so he becomes a symbol far beyond his actual death.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, his corpse was used in both ways, by the regime and against the regime.
In talking about corpses martyred in media, the sad truth is that there are a lot to choose from. With that in mind, there are three reasons why I chose to talk about Hamza Ali al-Khatib. First, because it was well known, yet not shown in mainstream media. Second, to acknowledge that his parents made the decision to have his body recorded to show the world. And lastly, to illustrate that images of death in media have multiple messages, oftentimes competing.
But the brutality that he endured, that we also witness through looking at his mutilated corpse, if that doesn't act as a call to action, then what is it? We are horrified. But does that turn into then a question of foreign policy, of America's role in the world, of what should be done with Assad? Or is it so horrific, and our capacity to understand death and this brutality of this death Are we unable to process it so we turn away? And it becomes just another horror of war.
Marie-Helene's point takes us to one of the most iconic images of the last couple years, which is the body of Aylan Kurdi, the 3-year-old Turkish boy whose dead body washed up on shore after he drowned trying to make his crossing from Turkey to Greece.
Yeah, it's interesting because his death, sort of surprisingly to me even, became a big media story. I mean, when we were out in Greece working, one of the German rescue boat drivers had left his high-paying job taking people around on a yacht to work as a rescue boat driver because of that image of Aylan Kurdi. And I was surprised that image became so popular because there are so many images of death out there. So why this one? And when you look at it, I think that there's 2 reasons.
One is that after circulating on social media, that image made it into mainstream media.
The other is when you look at the image itself, it sort of fits the classical metaphor of how people want to see death. You know, it's a child looking almost cherubic, lying down peacefully, almost sleeping. You know, you think of a dead child, the child's an angel.
That little boy did change the way people talked and reported about who these people were making this dangerous crossing. That they are people fleeing war and devastation, and that these are the risks that people are willing to take because, in fact, they are refugees, because where they're coming from is so horrible that they need to go to safety.
And what's interesting is a lot of what you heard from people, what they said when they saw that picture, they said, I could see that being my child.
Now, in contrast to the peaceful image of a child seemingly sleeping on the beach, there is the bystander dash cam body camera videos of police shooting primarily African-American men.
I want to talk more then about the martyred body, and specifically in relation to access to media, meaning people's access to media, so Emmett Till's mother, for example, made a choice.
Yep.
In this day and age, a lot of parents, most parents,
right,
when a body is martyred,
right,
don't get to make that choice.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm really glad you brought that up because it's something that I think about a lot, and I've written a little bit about it. Laquan McDonald, who's the boy who was shot in Chicago, and they had that videotape. They kept it for a year, and then they finally released it. And I remember watching, watching the news or seeing the news, and they aired it. I mean, the same clip of him just being dropped like a stray dog or something over, and I think it was 6 or 7 times, just over and over again. And you got to think, yeah, Mamie Bradley Till, like, she decided she was going to deliberately sacrifice her own privacy for a political cause. And that is a brave and laudable choice. But it is not a choice that many of the parents of these kids are making, or these people who are dying, who are being killed. And it to me, it really indexes, again, the inequality and the injustice, right? This is one more thing that's being taken away from these families. And I think it's also a way in which we can see that treatment of the dead really indexes treatment of the living.
This is where I become extremely conflicted. According to the Washington Post, citizens killed by police actually went down slightly. However, there is a 63% increase of the killings being caught on video. So this is the question that has me ethically confused. Are the airing of these killings necessary in order to show that injustice is being done?
I think the moment we're living through is this sort of this cognitive dissonance where it's like, okay, we saw this guy being killed. We saw these police officers shooting Laquan McDonald. And it doesn't seem to matter, right? It doesn't seem to make a difference in the outcome from a juridical standpoint. And yet that impulse is still there, that the image must be shown in order to let people know that injustice is going on.
Which leads me to the next question. In a broader sense, if we are continually being inundated with seeing death in the news, do we become desensitized to it?
You know, I'm not sure if we really become desensitized to it. I think it does change us.
Back with psychologist Sherry Hamby.
I think one of the results of all of this media exposure is not that we become used to it or that we become insensitive to it, but that we that we just know more about it than is really probably good for us in the grand scheme of things. There was a study that was done quite some years ago, and we don't do enough studies like it, but where people who had been exposed to violence had these much more complex cognitive networks for terms of violence. In this study, the people who had this most nuanced understanding of different terms of violence and being able to distinguish among different types of violence actually had lower well-being on some measures than people who had more simplistic categories and who would tend to just kind of lump all of that stuff into this big bad mush that they didn't really want to sort through any more carefully than that. And in some ways, I think really that we would just be sort of better off if we didn't know as much about it as we did.
So the study confirms that in regards to death and violence, a certain degree of ignorance is bliss. I will have a higher personal well-being unplugged and in a hammock, on some measures. Is watching the news worth the trade-off? You know, earlier when I said that we live in the most peaceful era in history, there is actually an exception, and it's specific to the United States. I'll give you one guess. It has to do with guns. More after this.
Do you consider yourself to be a fellow seeker? Do you believe there's something more to being human than what's available in the illusory cocoon of our material world? Or perhaps you're thinking of starting an existential scavenger hunt and would like a guidebook to help chart your path? If yes, you're in luck. Go to theadventuresofmementomori.com and sign up to receive D.S. Moss's upcoming book, Something to Believe in, a seeker's guide to finding your big belief. Sign up today and start your journey.
The act of death and violence that is on the rise in the United States is mass shooting. Studies have shown that there is a direct link between national media coverage and the frequency of these tragedies. It's called the contagion effect. In this context, contagion effect is a type of social influence. It refers to the propensity for certain behavior exhibited by one person to be copied by others who are either in the vicinity of the original actor or who have been exposed to media coverage describing the behavior of the original actor.
Now it seems like, just as someone who watches the news, that there's just a lot of copycats, right? We can say like Columbine was the benchmark, I guess. Mm-hmm. And then now it's people that are on the edge see that in a way they're becoming celebrities, right? And it seems like it happens just more and more and more frequently.
Yes, I think that most people think that there's some sort of contagion process going on, and it's not just true with mass shootings. There are other types of violence that have contagion sort of effects. For example, suicides also commonly occur in clusters, and one suicide can trigger a lot of other ones in the same community in a fairly short period of time.
A key motivator with mass shooters is that they know that they'll become famous for doing it.
That's an old problem. I mean, there are lots of criminals that have been, in some sense, romanticized from years past. Bonnie and Clyde, Jesse James. It's not a new problem to these mass shooters, but I definitely think that it contributes to that, and the sort of appeal that they are able to earn, and the admiration and the part of some, I think, is one of the reasons that they are contagious. I mean, if nobody knew about them, then how would there be some sort of trigger for a contagion effect?
My name is Max Stoffel. I'm a storyteller and poet.
While researching this episode, I came across Max's short film, Stop Making Murderers Famous. And although it's meant to be viewed on your phone, I'm going to play you the audio.
Someone put "Stop Making Stupid People Famous" on the sidewalk so that when I walk past it, I'll think about the cast of the Jersey Shore and the Hilton Sisters and countless more. But I actually don't believe they are stupid people. as it takes a certain type of intelligence to set in motion a series of events in which you're being paid to act like an idiot. And glossing over for a sec the message this sends to little kids when they're trying to figure out what self-confidence is, comparing their worth in likes to Kardashians, caring more about retweets than being respected, there are better ways to get attention, and far, far stupider ways to get famous. Which brings me to the point. We need to stop giving news coverage to the life stories of shooters.
I will not name the shooter. I will not give him the credit he probably sought prior to this horrific and cowardly act.
Yeah, and Michaela, here's what we can tell you about him. We do know his name, and we are reporting it. He's 26 years old. His name is... He listed himself as... He talks about 2 recent shootings, including the one of the Virginia reporters, in which he says, quote,
I'd like to set a motion to pass that henceforth all shooters shall be known in the media as the official and legal term, dumbass. Let them be unknown, mentioned only in a faceless, blurred, and anonymous way because unfortunately, in our twisted digital world, infamy is still a kind of fame. And it seems people are willing to do monstrous things so we'll hear their voice and remember their names. Let's stop listening to their voice. Stop echoing their names to those writing New York Times and People magazine profiles. Wherever you are, making money on fear has gone far too far. You're not just boosting monthly impression numbers, you're selling tragedies for ad dollars, ignoring people who are dying every single day because their stories don't drive traffic in quite the same way. This is terrible journalism, and it is not okay. To those sitting in offices making these calls to share the videos and life stories of mass murderers, y'all need to understand that you are an accessory to the next one. And there will be a next one. As I write this, I'm planning to release this after the next one, because so long as picking up a gun and taking aim is some perverted version of Kardashian fame, there will be a next one. So from this day forth, no more of their names in the news. Only pictures of the fallen and those who came to the rescue. Let the next kid who's figuring out what he's to do with the emotion bottled up inside scroll through his newsfeed and see no trace of a murderer's name or face as he reads the life stories of all the innocent people who had their futures stolen. All in favor?
And what was the genesis of Stop Making Murderers Famous?
So after the shooting in Oregon, I watched the clip that I actually used in the video. I cut off the end because CNN went on to quote the shooter and saying some pretty horrifying things. But I watched him say, I will not name the shooter. I will not give him the credit that he probably sought prior to this horrific and cowardly act. And then I watched the CNN journalist literally cut directly away from that and say, actually, no, we do have his name. We are reporting it. Here's his name. Here's how he's listed online. Here are the things that he said. Here's messages out to the world. And just the disconnect between national media and the people on the ground.
This bothered Max so much that he committed himself to making a difference.
This seemed to me like something that was so simple that if we could just change the way we tell the stories of these events, we could actually stop some future ones. And so I wanted to spearhead a campaign around that.
And so what's been some of the results of Stop Making Murderers Famous?
And the goal of this for me was always to establish policies with media organizations on how to tell these stories in the future. So there are 5 media organizations that have now established policies on how they'll name shooters in the future. The basis of those policies are that they will limit the name and likeness of the perpetrator in reporting, except when they're at large, and in doing so would aid in the perpetrator's capture.
The name and likeness of the killer are to be excluded from the headline and thumbnail image.
The thinking behind that being that, like, especially on social, that's the thing that's being passed around the internet. And often involuntarily, you can be looking at your friend's dog photos, and then all of a sudden, bam, you're hit with this guy who just killed 15 people.
Omitting the name entirely isn't realistic in journalism because it's a part of the story. But the aim is to make the name and likeness less prominent. And then on the flip side, to elevate the names and likenesses of all the victims, to send a cultural message that their lives are more important than the killers.
So that's like the first bullet of the policy established by these organizations. The second is to refrain from sharing direct quotes of perpetrators' writings or uploading perpetrators' YouTubes or Facebooks or self-serving photos. Avoid the occlusion of that media and focus on relevant themes without spreading the perpetrator's message. Avoid linking to an article that violates that policy, and exceptions to the previous term, like to A and B there, can be made, but only with a really purposeful conversation with the editor.
And so you've been brokering this?
Yeah, behind the scenes. But I kind of went into each of these organizations separately, was talking to them, seeing what the pain points were, and helping, working with them. It started as not this policy, and I worked with them to refine it to something that they were comfortable with. And then we got together as like a digital roundtable with everybody in the room and talked about what was something that we could align on. And now it's a matter of kind of getting through the corporate bureaucracy of actually making an announcement happen.
I love that poets are making change.
Me too.
British novelist Thomas Hardy once wrote, "If a way to the better there be, it lies in taking a full look at the worst." So for me, I'll put some pants on, get out of the hammock, and be a witness to the worst of the news. Even if I'm helpless to do anything about it, the recognition of it is important. The difference now is that I understand it's not just a passive relationship. It's a challenge, and the onus is on me to select and interpret the fire hose of information. And we should occasionally recognize that sometimes good things happen too. Thanks for joining me on another episode of The Adventures of Memento Mori. Thanks to Micah Guerin and Marie-Helene Carlton, Dr. Margaret Schwartz and Dr. Sherry Hamby, and Max Stossel from Stop Making Murderers Famous. Please check out all of their great work at www.remembertodie.com. I'm DS Moss, back again in 2 weeks for the season finale of The Adventures of Memento Mori.
The episode was produced by Josh Heilbrenner, DS Moss, and Hannah Beale. Theme music composed by Mikey Ballou. This has been a production of the Maida Creative Company. Until next time, keep seeking.